Ci troviamo oggi per correggere la simulazione IMAT, la seconda simulazione IMAT di quest'anno che vi abbiamo reso disponibile da lunedì scorso. Come la volta scorsa tutta la correzione sarà tenuta in inglese, ok? Quindi anche le domande eccetera, cercate di farle il più possibile in inglese nella chat di YouTube che trovate qui a fianco. O comunque in italiano vi rispondiamo lo stesso, non è che sia un problema. Tra oggi e domani poi sui social pubblichiamo le info precise per i precorsi, per la settimana di precorsi dal 17 al 22 agosto, con tutto il calendario di come si svolgeranno i precorsi, quindi attendete ancora qualche oretta e poi saprete tutto. Io non mi dilungo in altre chiacchiere, diciamo, e sarà disponibile ovviamente durante la mattinata poi sul sito la correzione e la graduatoria per chi ha partecipato, ha compilato il modulo Google e basta. A posto così lascio la parola a Federica che vi inizierà con la correzione di logica e di cultura. Ciao a tutti, a dopo. Vai Fede, quando vuoi puoi iniziare a correggere.
Grazie. Sorry guys, so I'm Federica from first year of IMAT, and today, sorry it's my cat, and today we're doing together both logic and general knowledge. So let's start with the first question. Before the ancient DNA revolution, researchers had to rely on examining skeletons, or more rarely mummies, for visible evidence of disease. Okay, I'll summarize this by saying that what it's saying is that they found that there are some skeletons that seem to have this antigen called Duffy antigens that seems to be protective of Plasmodium vivax, which can cause malaria. What the text and the question is asking you is which of these is not supported directly or indirectly. The correct answer is D. People lacking the Duffy antigen are immune to malaria infections because, as the text say, it offers some protection against the malaria parasite. So it's not a complete protection. So it would not be correct to say that people who had this antigen are safe from malaria. So the correct answer is D. Okay. Among, sorry a second, among 30 people from a university, 1 in 6 of them are Italian and 1 in 3 are European. The overall GPA of the university class is 28 and the GPA of European students is 27 out of 30. Assuming the GPA of Italian students is exactly 26 out of 30, what is the GPA for non-Italian students? Okay, so 1 in 6, which means that we have 5 Italians and 1 in 3 are Europeans, which means that we have 10 European people. Do keep in mind that Italians are European, and so we count them inside this number, so that the 10 Europeans. This means that the non-Europeans are 20. We know that the Italian average in GPA is 26. We first calculate the total GPA. We know that the GPA of the whole class, the average is 28. So we multiply that by 30. So 840. We know the Italian average is 26. We multiply it by the number of Italians, which the result is 130. Then we do 80 and 40, so the total GPA minus the GPA of Italians, which is 710. And then we divide that by the number of remaining people, because they're asking us about the GPA of non-European people, which means that we count some of these people, the ones that are not Italian. So we divide that by 25, and the result is 28.4. I'd like to mention how, since the total GPA is 28 and both the GPA from European and Italian people are quite lower, this would mean that the result can only be 28 or 29, so it must be quite higher in order to bring it to that point. Especially since there are so many students that are Italian or European in a class. So you could ideally just count 2 of the answers and make things easier for you, if that could help you. A jeweler sells a watch with an 18% reduction on the price. That is a $36 reduction. What was the price of the watch? This is quite easy because we call X the initial price, and 18% of X is 36. Which means that if we find the X just by doing 36 multiplied by 100 divided by 18, we have the result, which is $200. So the correct answer is C. Please always remember that the X questions, there are many questions you will be required to do this substitution with an X, and it will make things much easier in general. I wish to tile an area of a wall 240 centimeters wide by 200 centimeters high. Tiles are 20 centimeters square. I will therefore need 12 per 10, so with 120 tiles. Which of the following uses the same method of calculation as that above? Okay, this question can be tricky because seeing all this number, you might think that they are trying to calculate something. What you need to get is the essence of that statement and apply it to something else. We know that we are measuring something, so we already can, for example, point to E, which is the correct answer, by the way, because we have it's very similar in the sense that here we have tiles and here we have tables, so they can be substituted. And the kind of logic behind this calculation is the same. So the correct answer is E. Fill the blanks. X is to bowel, what X is to backbone. Bowel and backbone are another way to call the intestine and vertebral column. So the correct answer is C. Okay, let me see if you have any questions. Okay. 6. In order to succeed in academic examination, it is necessary to study. Therefore, if a student works hard in a particular subject, he or she should do well when it comes to the time of the examination. Which of the following best describes the flow of the argument? I'll go directly to the one that is the correct answer, which is C. It assumes that studying hard is a sufficient condition for academic success. It says that it is necessary, but necessary does not imply the sufficient condition. And this is a general thing that you always need to remember because it is used very often in both the Italian and the IMAT test. It's a branch of logics that I highly suggest you check before the exam. Necessary does not mean sufficient. So C is the correct answer. Okay. 7. Action has to be taken now to stop the spread of bovine tuberculosis, TB. Experts agree that reducing the number of badgers in the most heavily infected areas will help to break the cycle of infection between badgers and cattle and begin to reduce TB in both species. Although badgers can be vaccinated, there is no vaccine available to protect our cattle, and best estimates suggest it will be 10 years before one is available. The only way to stop bovine TB spreading is to kill badgers. Which one of the following, if true, most strengthens the above argument? Okay, remember that in this case, we are trying to strengthen what this says, which says that it will be useful to start killing badgers. And the only one in this case that can strengthen, because less efforts are made to remove badgers, many are injured rather than killed outright. It's not even, it's out of topic. Well, B, C, and D all weaken the argument because they try to say that it is not in a way necessary, or it is not useful to kill badgers. While in the A option, we see that 5 annual vaccinations are necessary to protect a badger, which means that it will be very pricey and time-consuming before it starts taking effect, which means that killing the badgers would actually be faster and more efficient. Therefore, it does strengthen the argument. So the correct option is A. 2 runners, Liz and Rory, are training for a competition. Rory passes the start point every 9 minutes. Liz passes the start point every 15 minutes. They have just set off on their routes. How long will it be before they meet up at the start point again? In this case, you need to do the least common multiple, the minimo comune multiplo in Italian, of the 2 numbers, which is 9 and 15. Remember that to do that, you take the prime numbers. So in the end, it will be 3 to the power of 2 multiplied by 5, which is 45 as a result. Do study some basic algebra for the logic part, because it will often be required. 60% of the people registered in a sports center do swimming and 70% play tennis. The total people registered in the sports center are 200. How many of them do both swimming and tennis? Okay, first we calculate how many of them swim and how many of them play tennis, which is either 120 and 140. For the people swimming is 120. From these, we need to subtract this number from the total number of people that are in the gym. So 200 minus 120, and the result is 80, which means that this is the amount of students not participating in swimming. Then we subtract the amount of people participating in tennis, so 140 minus 80, and it equals to 60. This can be done also in reverse, which means that you could have done first the people playing tennis, so started from 140, do 200 minus 140, and then the number of people swimming minus the result. And the result will always be 60. So the correct answer is E, 60. Then, Mark has got 3 red hats and 2 white hats. He invites John, Mike, and Tom to play a game. He blindfolds them and invites them to take a seat so that they can see one another. He puts a hat on their heads so that any of them can see the other hat's colors, but not his own. So Mark hides the 2 remaining hats and covers his friends. Finally, he asks each of them to find out the color of their own hat. Neither John or Mike can answer. Tom, okay, so this is a bit hard to read in my opinion. Still, you need to imagine 3 people sitting one in front of the other. You have 3 red possible hats that are red and 2 that are white. 2 of these people are not able to say which color their hat is, which means that in front of them, they are seeing 1 red hat and 1 white hat. In that scenario, they would not know whether they have a red hat or a white one. And the 2 people have the same problem, John and Mike. Therefore, Tom, since he can see their color, he can say for sure that his hat is red. So he is sure he wears a red hat, even blindfolded. Okay, now we pass to general knowledge. I'll be always here. So what's the capital of New Zealand? Unfortunately, with general knowledge, it's a matter of whether you know it already or not. In this case, it was a bit hard to get out, especially because the correct answer is C, Wellington. But A and B were all the capitals of New Zealand, so it is also a bit hard to actually take the right answer. And in these cases, maybe it's better not to answer than lose points in case you don't know it. When was the Magna Carta Libertatum Agritum? The right answer is C. As you know, the Magna Carta Libertatum was done as a way to give less power to the king. It was wanted by barons in England. And yes, this is history. It is possible that you will be asked these more common dates and documents of history, even in IMAT. Which of the following branches of the European Union has Ursula von der Leyen as president? And it's the European Commission, the AC. I suggest looking at the Commission of the European Union. I highly suggest it. If not for the IMAT, which is can be a bit more global in its questions, in the sense that they might not ask something that is so Eurocentric. It is still a common question to ask anything regarding the European Union. So do take a look of different leaders if you have the time. Who is the author of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner? This also, it is S.T. Coleridge, by the way. The correct answer is B. And yes, this you can find it in English literature. Metaphysics is one of the principal works of Aristotle. Of course, it's his main work. So the correct answer is C. Luis Sepulveda, famous writer that among other novels wrote The Story of a Seagull and the Cat Who Taught Her How to Fly, was born in Chile. D is the right answer. It might be possible that at the time they might take some questions that are about recent history. So I do also suggest being up to date with what happens to the word. When this question was written, the author had recently died, passed away, sorry. And so yes, do keep up with general knowledge and what happens in the world. No questions, great. Which one of the following was the author to a short series of stories, namely Dubliners? And the answer is James Joyce. He's the same from the same author of Ulysses. The two are two connected pieces of literature. And in a way, you could also, in this case, go a bit around it in the sense that Charles Baudelaire is a French author in any case. So you might want to think that he would not write something about Dublin. William Turner is a painter. William Shakespeare, it's you might want to exclude it since it's not even a common name for his compositions. While Rudyard Kipling, I do suggest remembering him because there's a common question about him. He wrote The Burden of the White Man, and it's a question that can be quite common. So the correct answer is C. Who produced and detected X-rays? And the correct answer is Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen. A Röntgen is also the unit of measure of X-rays. So do remember that all of these other people did things that are not related. Do remember that Albert Einstein studied the photoelectric effect, And Marie Curie was a chemist. She did other things with nuclear, about nuclear chemistry. What happened on March 3rd, 1918? It's the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Again, this question is a bit Eurocentric, but it is possible to find them also in IMAT. This question about First World War and the Second World War. In which of the following states there is higher percentage of Christians than the others? The correct answer is Ethiopia. You might have guessed it because North Korea and China are generally not very religious countries. Sudan is mainly Muslim, and Pakistan should be Buddhist. So if you had any doubt, it might have been from Pakistan to Ethiopia. But the correct answer in this case is Ethiopia. As you can see from these numbers, they are quite different. In which year the independence of the United States was declared? In 1766. So D is the correct answer. In the ancient times, the pigment purpura was obtained from, a type of shellfish. So the correct answer is A. Okay, guys, I'll see you later for chemistry. So now I'll leave you to biology. See you later.
Okay, let's begin. I am Vincenzo. I am a student of third year of medicine, and I will be correcting your biology test now. Okay, I need for the, okay. It should be this one. Yes. So I guess you can see it. So we can start right off. Okay. Cholesterol is a lipid that can be found in 1. Eukaryotic cells, 2. Prokaryotic cells, 3. Viruses. You can easily exclude viruses because they don't usually feature lipidic structures inside of the membranes. And you can also exclude prokaryotic cells since they use another kind of lipid, which is hopanoids. Therefore, the correct answer is C, the one that only features the eukaryotic cells. 1. Moving on. Wait, yes. Moving on. Which of the following mutations usually leads to a truncated protein? Nonsense mutation, missense mutation, silent and frame shift mutation. So the correct answer here is, again, the one that features only one answer, which is E, because the only one that really produces a truncated protein is the nonsense mutation, since it introduces a stop codon, UAA, UAG, or UGA. Therefore, correct answer is E, one only. Moving on. Which of the following cellular structures are involved in synthesis of secreted glycoproteins? First, lysosome, 2, RER, which is a endoplasmic reticulum, and Golgi apparatus. Well, you know that lysosome is usually involved in catabolic process, not anabolic. So you also know that RER, rough endoplasmic reticulum, is the place where the protein part of the glycoproteins is synthesized, and then Golgi apparatus is responsible for the glycosylation of these proteins. Therefore, the correct answer you will see is the D, the one that features 2 and 3, RER and Golgi apparatus. I'm also reading the question, so if you have any, you can ask. Which of the following options are correct about beta oxidation? Remember, beta oxidation is a process that makes of complex fatty acids single molecules very short, which is acetyl-CoA, which is also one of the answers. So let's move on. It is involved in nucleic acids metabolism, just as E, protein metabolism. You can exclude both of these because you know that that this process is lipidic. It takes place in the mitochondria, that is true, and with the production of acetyl-CoA and this is also true, and doesn't occur in human organisms. If we didn't have beta oxidation, we would have all the consequences of diabetes. So we need this process in order to produce energy out of lipids. Therefore, the correct answer here is C, the one that features answer 2 and 3. Which of the following are water-soluble vitamins? This is a very mnemonic question. Perhaps something you can do is learn the vitamin associated, like vitamin D, of course, it's lipidic, and tocopherol is lipidic too, it's vitamin E. Ascorbic acid and vitamin B9 on the other side are both water-soluble, because they are the ones that, yes, we take with our diet, but they will not have a consequence on the body if you take too much, because you will excrete them, eliminate them. So here is a list of fat-soluble vitamins and water-soluble vitamins that I recommend that you read, so that you have at least a general idea of what you have ahead of you. Therefore, the correct answer is, of course, D, the one that features 3 and 4. This is a pretty much difficult question, one that I made personally. An affected woman has 2 children, a boy and a girl, both affected by the same disease. The offspring of the 2 is composed by an affected son from the daughter's side and 2 healthy daughters from the son's. How is that possible? All the information that you need to answer, of course, are kept in the question itself. And now we will see. The disease is caused by an ex novo mutation of a gene on chromosome X. If it was so, then it wouldn't have, the son wouldn't have the disease. The disease is caused by an ex novo mutation of a gene on a sexual chromosome. Again, you can see here the correction, which is, well, better explained probably than I will do now, which basically implies that if it was a sexual chromosome, it wouldn't be, it's only transmitted, the X is only transmitted by the mother, so you wouldn't have the offspring with the same disease. We can go by excluding the rest of the answer in case of the mutation involves an X chromosome. It would have to be a dominant mutation in order for the daughter to be affected. But if both the daughters of the son are not affected, you can easily say that this is not X-linked, because if it was, then the daughters of the son, the grandchildren, would have the disease, because the son can only give an X to a daughter in order for the daughter to be a female. So you can exclude A and E. This leaves only option D, and you can easily guess it directly. If you remember that it's only inherited by the mother and therefore is passed to the female side of the offspring. The answer, to be precise, says most of the mitochondrial chromosomes, because you have to remember that each mitochondrion carries several chromosomes and each cell carries several mitochondria. So it wouldn't be right to say that the chromosome and mitochondrial chromosome is mutated, because if one is, then you don't have the disease in the phenotype. Therefore, the correct answer is D. Which of the following statements are correct for all enzyme inhibitors? They alter the shape of the actin site, they denature the enzyme, they increase the activation energy, they reduce the rate of enzyme catalyzed reaction. I'm gonna go straight ahead on this one. An enzyme inhibitor is a molecule that binds to an enzyme and it decreases its activity. Therefore, we can say that the concentration of enzyme inhibitors increases, the rate of enzyme activity decreases, and thus the amount of product produced is inversely proportional to the concentration of inhibitor molecules. Therefore, the answer here is B, which was the one that said for only. They reduce the rate of the enzyme catalyzed reaction. Moving on. In oxidative phosphorylation, the final electron acceptor molecule is CO2. You know that that is incorrect because it mutually exclusive with the final electron acceptor molecule is O2, and it's actually the final electron acceptor because it's most electronegative molecule involved in the process. So you know that when O2 is reduced, you have CO2. Therefore, this is the product. NDA and ADH and FADH2 are oxidized to produce ADP. That is, of course, true. They are the first molecules to be oxidized in order to transport the electrons. Protons are pumped inside the mitochondrial matrix. Well, protons, they do go inside of the mitochondrial matrix, but they do not go directly. I mean, it's not a pump. It's not an active system. They are readily pumped in the space between outer and inner membrane. When they flow inside of the matrix, they do that because of the gradient, and it's not an active process. Therefore, we can say that the correct answer here is A, the one that only features 2 and 3, as the first and the fourth are wrong for the reasons that I said above. Okay, TRP operon uses direct sunlight to produce its final molecule. Well, you know that TRP operon is an example of repressible operon. And here there is an explanation that is, of course, better than what I can say now. It's the perfect example of repressible operon since its activity is inhibited by the tryptophan. And of course, it codes for enzymes that lead to the biosynthesis of tryptophan. So it does not code for the tryptophan itself, since I'm not sure that we can really synthesize amino acids. So correct answer is D. It's an example of repressible operon. A baby is taken to hospital with muscular weakness, immunological defects, and metabolic acidosis. Your suspect is a mitochondrial disease, which DNA sequencing proves to be right. However, both parents are healthy, nor do they show any mutation. That is probably because in order to answer this question, you have to reason on which one might be the most probable cause, because it is kind of absurd, the answer. But if you think about it, the man is not the real father. This does not concern, since mitochondria are inherited by the mother. So it's not really relevant if the father is not affected. Even if he was, he wouldn't transmit the disease. The mitochondrion developed an ex novo mutation. This would be also correct, but it's not the most probable answer between these ones, because it has many, again, as I said before, a cell bears many mitochondria, and each mitochondrion bears many chromosomes, and you have I don't know how to say it in English, the fettosoglia, that basically you have to reach a certain amount of chromosomes that are mutated in order to have a mitochondrion that is mutated, and you have to have a certain amount of mitochondria mutated in order to have the disease phenotypically. So it is highly improbable. And threshold effect, thank you, Brenno. Their father's mitochondrial genome bears a reciprocal mutation, and the answer below is basically the same concept, but this makes not real much sense, because there is only one type of chromosome in mitochondrion, so the concept of reciprocal mutation doesn't really apply to mitochondria. Therefore, as absurd as it may sound, the most probable answer here is that the mother is not the real mother, and actually, as I said here, perhaps someone donated the egg, or they were simply adopted, so it's something that it wasn't said if the child was the real child, or if the egg was donated and stuff. Therefore, the most probable answer here is B. The woman is not the real mother, and he, the baby, inherited the disease from his real mother. Which of the following functions are carried out in peroxisomes? Synthesis of bile acids, detoxification, and synthesis of steroids. Well, detoxification is, of course, one of the main activities of the peroxisome, but you have to understand that this organelle is also responsible for peroxidation in general. Therefore, bile acids are made, the synthesis of bile acids is made possible by this kind of reactions. Therefore, the answer here is D. B, of course. 1 and 2. Because again, synthesis of bile acids is something that is made possible by the peroxidation of cholesterol, and detoxification is, of course, one of the main processes that are led in this organelles. Ribosomes are cellular organelles that can be found attached to the cellular membrane, attached to the nuclear membrane, cellular membrane, free-scattered in cytoplasm, attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. Well, of course, you know that endoplasmic reticulum is named rough endoplasmic reticulum because of the ribosomes. So you are sure that the fourth answer must be included. And you also know that it must be scattered in the cytoplasm. They are less frequent, but we do have this ribosomes in our cytoplasm. Therefore, the correct answer here is D, the one that features 3 and 4. Which of the following statement is correct about epistatic genes? A little Greek, you know that epistatic means to stay above. And this is the general concept behind epistatic genes. Basically, you have this gene, its product is responsible for the whole action. If I want to explain it better, imagine that you have an enzyme that synthesizes in a flower, okay? In a flower, you have an enzyme that synthesizes for the pigment blue. Then you have another enzyme that is responsible for the deposition of the said blue pigment. If you don't have the enzyme that is responsible for this action, you can have all the pigment you want. You can produce all the pigment you want. You will never have a phenotype blue because this phenotype will not be this pigment will never be deposited properly. Also, this is interesting because it's behind it's the reason behind the different coloration of Labradors, the dogs. They can be yellow, white, or brown because of these 2 epistatic genes, one that synthesizes the color and the one that deposits. So, this being said, let's go to the answer. Their expression is silenced by another gene. No, the code for epiphysis, which doesn't make any sense. They're frequently involved in hemostasis. I don't know, and I don't think so. None of this. Actually, it's a form of non-Mendelian inheritance because, again, you can inherit a phenotype, a genotype that technically will allow you to have certain phenotype, but this will not be so because, again, as I said, you don't have the second gene, the second enzyme that is responsible for the phenotype. So you see. It's basically, oh, this one is it's a very funny example with hair that you don't have any hair, you will never know if you are blonde or red, of course. So this gene is supposed to be epistatic above these ones. So this being said, I imagine this is the end of my part. If you have any questions, of course, you can leave them on the YouTube chat. And I leave the word to my colleagues of Human Anatomy and Physiology, and I wish you goodbye.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. So good morning, everybody. My name is Brenna. I'm a fifth-year medical student, and I've just returned from France, where I spent an Erasmus experience. Okay, so I just pin my video. Okay, just a second. Okay, so that's fine. As I said, today I will guide you through the correction of the human anatomy and physiology. Okay. So here we are, human anatomy and physiology. So we'll start from question 36 to question 40. So question 36 that asks you to identify among the structures listed the one that that is part of the central nervous system. So first you'll have to make a necessary distinction. In a human nervous system, you can identify the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system, let's say that it is the control unit for all the nervous system, and it is made of the brain and another part, which will be our answer, and we'll discuss them later on. Whereas the peripheral nervous system is the part that carries messages to and from the central nervous system, and it is also subdivided into a somatic part and an autonomic part. I use this picture to clarify, so we can identify again the central nervous system, where we can find the brain with its lobes, so the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. And then there's the other structure we are looking for, which is the spinal cord, which will be our answer. In the spinal cord, you can identify the brainstem, which is, let's say, the most ancient part, which is subdivided into midbrain, pons, and medulla, and the cerebellum. The spinal cord, as you can see, it's a structure. It's a structure that relates the central and the peripheral nervous system, and it starts from the brain and it goes all the way down to the lumbar region of the vertebral column, ending around L2, L3. It's a connection structure because, as you can see, we have the spinal nerves that begins from the peripheral nervous system and goes in periphery. We have a somatic peripheral nervous system which controls the activity of voluntary muscles on the motor part, and it has also a sensory part which sends all the information, which transmits all the information, the sensory information, to the central nervous system. And then we have an autonomic part. The autonomic part is divided, as you may know, in a sympathetic part and a parasympathetic part. In general, we say that sympathetic and parasympathetic have opposed actions. So we say, for example, for the sympathetic, fight or flight, and for the parasympathetic, rest and digest. Actually, it is more complicated than this because it's a matter of interaction between the neurotransmitter relapse and the receptor in a logic of activation and inhibition, but this is more detailed. I'll just stop there. So as I said, in fact, the answer we were looking for is spinal cord. Very briefly, the other answers were spinal nerves. So as I said, there are 31 paired nerves that begins from the spinal cord and go to the periphery. And we have 31 paired. As I said, they have sensory functions as well as motor functions. So here we have the spinal cord, which is the answer we were looking for. Then we have the cranial nerves, which are 12 paired nerves, which are located just beneath the brain, and they also have sensory as well as motor functions. And interestingly, they are named in a logic from the frontmost to the rearmost. So the first one is the olfactory, which is the frontmost, and the last one here is the hypoglossal, which is in fact the rearmost. Then we have the Vomer bone. The Vomer bone, it's an unpaired facial bone, which is included in the skull, as you can see. It is located in a mid-sagittal line. That means exactly in the at the middle of the skull. And as you can see here, it forms, in fact, the inferior part of the nasal septum. And finally, the eye. I imagine you know that it is the organ that allows us the sense of view. And in fact, we've included it because the retina, the rearmost part, is made of some sensory fibers that will form later the optic nerve, which is the second cranial nerve. So to sum up, the correct answer in this case is A, spinal cord. I forgot to say, if you have any question, don't hesitate to post it on the comments section on YouTube, and I'll check back later. So moving on to question 37. This is the first, in fact, of a series of 3 Cambridge-type questions. And in this case, you were asked to identify the correct combination of blood vessels that are able to vascularize the heart. So an important thing is that we talk about blood vessels that vascularize. So we are talking about arteries, and this one, this being known, you were able at first to exclude the option 3, which is the vena cava, and that allows you to immediately exclude basically answer C. Why? Because in fact, vena cava, you know, it is the main venous blood vessel in the systemic circulation. It is divided into a superior part and an inferior part, and its function as a vein is in fact to allow to drain the non-oxygenated blood coming from the periphery through the other veins. So that being excluded, all the other 3 are arteries. So we'll analyze them. Together. So next one is the aorta, which on contrary is the main arterial blood vessel, as you can see in this picture. It is made in fact of many branches, many upper and lower branches, and its function is obviously to allow the flow of oxygenated blood to the periphery, to the tissues and organs in periphery. But in fact, the very first branch that we can identify in aorta are the coronary arteries. In fact, the coronary arteries, as I said, they are the very first 2 branches of the aorta, and we can say in some ways that their function is to drain, to take the arterial oxygenated blood to the heart, which is in fact the very first organ to be reached by oxygenated blood. So talking about coronary arteries, we can identify 2 main coronary arteries, the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery. The right coronary artery, as you can see, it passes through the septum between the atrium and the ventricle on the right side, and then it turns around the heart to reach its posterior face. Whereas the left coronary artery, shortly after reaching the anterior faces, it divides into a left anterior descending artery and a circumflex artery that will turn around to reach the posterior face on the left side. And as you can see here, in fact, the circumflex artery and the right coronary artery will meet on the posterior face of the heart at the crux cordis, which is in fact the cross point. And here, one of them, or maybe the 2, will anastomose to give birth, in fact, to the posterior descending artery, which will determine the dominance of the circulation of the coronary circulation. And finally, we have the vertebral artery. Very briefly, it's as you can see, it's a collateral branch of the subclavian artery. And it provides, in fact, the vascularization of the posterior part of the brain. As you can see, it is called vertebral artery because it passes just beside the vertebrae. And then, in fact, it joins, it's a pair structure. So we have a right coronary artery and a left coronary artery. They will then join to form the basilar artery, and then the basilar artery will later divide into two posterior cerebral arteries that will provide, in fact, the vascularization of the posterior part of the brain. So to sum up, the only correct option here is number 4, coronary arteries, and the answer so is E. Okay, so I just check. I don't see any questions posed, so I'll move on to question 38. Question 38 is the second Cambridge type question, and this time this concerns the humerus, and in particular the articulation of a bone among the ones listed with the proximal epiphysis of the humerus. So so in this case, to cope well with this question, you needed, in fact, 2 steps. The first step is to identify the humerus. The humerus is the bone that forms the arm, which is in fact a part of the upper limb. So the upper limb is all this. The arm is this part that goes from the shoulder to the elbow. So here you have the humerus, and then you have to identify the proximal epiphysis of the humerus. The epiphysis is basically the end of a bone. So in this case, we have 2 ends, this one and this other one. And then you have to identify the proximal epiphysis. So in anatomical terms, we say we call proximal everything that is nearer to the body, whereas we call distal everything that is further from the body itself. So in this case, as you can see, we have identified the proximal epiphysis of the humerus, which is this part. And as you can see in this picture, the proximal epiphysis articulates directly with the scapula. So among the bones that we have listed, the only one correct is the scapula. Very briefly, the radius and the ulna articulate, in fact, with the humerus, but not with the proximal, but with the distal epiphysis. Whereas the clavicle, which is this bone, does not articulate with the humerus, but with the scapula, more precisely with the acromion, which is a process that derives from the scapula in the so-called acromion clavicular articulation. So that said, scapula is the only correct option, and the right answer is therefore A. So still no questions, as I see. So I'll move on to question 39, which is the last Cambridge type question. And this time it is about the hematopoietic organs. So I briefly remind you in this case that hematopoiesis is in fact the process which allows the formation of blood cellular components, and we can say the main features of this process. First thing is that it comes from a multipotential hematopoietic stem cell. It's a unique stem cell which will then divide into 2 main lines, which will then differentiate in 2 main lines, a myeloid line and a lymphoid line. So on the lymphoid line, the lymphoid line is the one that will then give birth to the lymphocytes. As you can see, the B lymphocytes, which will then mature into plasma cells, the T lymphocytes, the NK cells, and some dendritic cells, the lymphoid dendritic cells. On the other hand, we have the myeloid progenitor, the myeloid lines, which will then subdivide into many other lines. So we'll have the megakaryocytes, which will form the platelets, and the erythroblast, which will then form the red blood cells, and the myeloblast, which will then eventually subdivide into granulocytes and monocytes, which will then give birth to macrophages. In fact, this process allows the formation of all cells that we can find in the blood. So that said, where does this process take place? So we all know that in adults, the main site of hematopoiesis is in fact the bone marrow, as you can see in this picture. But it does not end like this, because we also have other sites of hematopoiesis, which are operating normally in the fetal life. So the spleen, in fact, it has many functions in adults. As you can see, there's a white pulp which is involved in the active immune response, which involves some humoral and cellular mediated pathways, and the red pulp, which is involved in the filtration of red blood cells, a process that is called hemocataresis, and that allows the elimination of old red blood cells after about 120 days. But in fetus, as I said before, the spleen is also involved as an hemopoietic organ, and in fact, the spleen is the main hematopoietic organ in the fetus, in the fetal life, and it conserves, in fact, this function till birth, where it ceases immediately after birth. But then we have another organ, which is the liver. The liver, we know it has many multiple functions, but what we're interested in today is that in fact it is the very first hematopoietic organ, and this function starts let's say from the first weeks of embryonic lives, and it lasts through the entire fetal life, together with the spleen, in fact. And lastly, the only answer that remains is the thymus, which is also the only incorrect answer, because the thymus, it is an organ which is implied, in fact, only in the process of proliferation and maturation of lymphocytes. So it is a process that comes, in fact, short after the hematopoiesis. So to sum up, the only correct options were 1, 2, and 3. Thymus is incorrect, and the answer is therefore D. Okay, so I will end with the last question, question 40, which is about parietal cells of the stomach wall. So I'll just point out that the stomach, as you may know, is divided into 3 sections. So the fundus, the body, and the antrum. And in fact, inside the stomach, we can identify a mucosa, an absinthic gland mucosa, full of glands made as spits, and it is covered by a layer of columnar epithelium, where we can identify the gastric glands. In this epithelium, we can identify many different cells, and this depends on the sections of the stomach, because we have a different mucosa in the fundus and in the body, different from the antrum. And then it depends also on the position of the cells in the pits, so in the glands. But keeping it in general, we can identify some main cells, the main cells, which are the ones listed here. So we have the G cells and D cells, which have a regulatory action on the acid secretion, and this involves the secretion of somatostatin and gastrin. As you can see, they have opposed actions on the acid secretion. Then we have the goblet cells, which are cells shaped as a goblet, which secrete mucus, mucus that serves as a protection for the gastric to the gastric mucosa. Then we have the Schiff cells, which secrete pepsinogen, which is a precursor to pepsin, which is the main protease. It's a lactic enzyme acting on proteins. And finally, we have parietal cells. Parietal cells are the cells that secrete the gastric acid, that is hydrochloric acid, but they are also able to secrete another product, another molecule, very important, which is Castle's intrinsic factor. Castle's intrinsic factor, in fact, is a molecule that is able to bind vitamin B12. Its function is related to first, a protection for vitamin B12 from the degrading action of gastric acid, and then Castle's intrinsic factor is necessary for the absorption of vitamin B12, a process that will be ruled later on in the ileum. And finally, I'll just say that vitamin B12 is an important, a very important component involved in erythropoiesis. That is the process giving birth to the red blood cells. And in fact, low B12 values are a marker of a type of anemia. So that said, the correct answer in this case is B. And so with this last question, I've ended my part of correction. So I'll just wait some more seconds to check in case there are any questions on the comments on YouTube. So I'll just wait some more seconds. And in the meantime, I'd like to thank you all for your attention so far. And I hope to see you all soon, maybe as medical students. And in any case, I'd like to say you good luck on your preparation and then on your future studies, whatever it is. And so, if there are no questions, I'll pass on to Federica for the correction of the chemistry part. So good luck, everyone, and ciao.
Thank you very much. Okay, guys, so I'm back and we are doing chemistry together. Okay, so 41. Naturally occurring chlorine consists of the two isotopes listed in the following table. You see the two options. It's always chlorine 35 and 37. Determine the atomic mass of chlorine. They gave us the mass, the UMA, and the percent abundance. To calculate the atomic mass, the general atomic mass, what we do is a weighted average of it, which means that what we do is take the atomic mass of each, multiplied, we take the atomic mass of each, we sum it together, And we divide it by 100 because it's, again, it's a percentage. So this means that is 34.7 multiplied by 76, which is the percentage, and which is the abundance of chlorine that they give us in this percentage, plus 36.97 multiplied by 24, all divided by 100. What we get is the weighted average, which is considered the value that is generally for the atomic mass for chlorine. Remember this because very often you will be asked to determine this value, and remember that it is a weighted average among all the existing isotopes of an element. Okay, so the correct answer is E, 35.5. This is what comes out once you do the weighted average. Okay, number 42. What is the oxidation number of chromium in calcium dichromate? They give us the formula. Okay, so here you have to know a few things, like for example that oxygen is often is always -2, as always the oxidation number of -2. So the oxidation number of the amount of oxygen we have is -2 multiplied per 7, which is -14. And to that we add the oxidation number of calcium, which is only and can be only +2, which means that with oxygen and calcium we have -12 of oxidation number. They are asking us the oxidation number of chromium. Notice though that of course it has to be 12, which is divided by 2 because we have two elements of chromium, which means that the total the oxidation number is +6. So the result is 6. Very important to remember the most common oxidation numbers. Okay, which of the following options represents the right oxidation sequence of organic compounds from less to most oxidized? Okay, so when we say an oxidation process, we mean something that takes away hydrogen from the main carbon. So we essentially need to start from the element that has the most hydrogens bound to the main carbon. By the way, you can find this whole topic in organic chemistry. Still, here we can see that the element which has the most hydrogen bound to the main carbon is for sure methane. From here on out, the correct answer is E. I do suggest checking out the shape of each of these elements, which has the basic elements of organic chemistry. We start from methane, which is a central carbon with 4 hydrogen. Then alcohol, which has only 3 hydrogen. It has also another section, but it is mainly a carbon with 3 hydrogens around it. Then going down, aldehyde. We know that an alcohol can, an oxidized alcohol becomes an aldehyde. This in general is a connotation of organic chemistry. From then, once that is oxidized, it becomes a carboxyl acid. And then the least oxidized of all of the options is carbon dioxide. In this case, you could also list out each option that had the ketone, because it is true that an alcohol as secondary alcohol, once it is oxidized, becomes a ketone. But a ketone cannot be oxidized without breaking the bond of the 2 carbons, which means that we cannot consider this, because the oxidation sequence we are looking for is something that does not break the carbon-carbon bond. And we can also take away amine because it has the group that it represents does not have carbon. And so the correct answer is E. Methane, alcohol, aldehyde, carboxyl acid, carbon dioxide. If you go check on the internet the formula for each one of these, you'll see that you have a central carbon with progressing one less hydrogen bond. Okay, number 44. Calculate how many grams of CO2 are dissolved in a 1 liter bottle of sparkling water at 2.4 atmospheres and 25 degrees. Here they give us the coefficient, the constant of Henry, and at this temperature, the same temperature. And they give us these values for carbon and oxygen. Okay, so what we need to use here, as the constant might have suggested you, is the Henry's law, which means that the quantity is this constant multiplied by the atmosphere. But if you don't remember it, I'd like to make you notice how, looking just at what they give us essentially something to calculate. They give us the pressure and this number. So if we want to calculate the quantity, the moles over liters, we can assume that we need to multiply this number for the with the atmosphere in order to eliminate the atmosphere and be left with the mole over liters. And once we have that, they give, we can calculate the molecular mass of CO2. They gave to us the numbers that are needed, which are, of course, 12 and 16. 12 plus 32, because we have 2 oxygen, so 44 mole per gram. And then we know that to calculate the mass, you need to multiply the number of moles multiplied per the molecular mass, which means the result we found before through the Henry's law, or through that logic reason that we used, multiplied for the molecular mass that we found before. And the result in grams is 3.6 grams. So the correct answer is B. I do suggest looking at, in chemistry, looking a lot at measures, at the unit of measure, because that will help you a lot, even if you don't remember the specific, laws, and you remember the basics of chemistry. Like, for example, how to calculate the number of moles and the molecular mass. So the correct answer is B. 45. Given the reaction, and it gives the reaction, which of the following options is not correct? Okay, I'd like to make you, you to notice that A, B, and E are all connected, and that the answers C and D are one the opposite of the other. So just by that, you can assume that one of these two has to be the incorrect one, because they cannot coexist together, possibly. So what we do here is look at each oxidation number for each compound. Remember that the oxidation number for an element on its own is, or as they call it here, molecular phosphorus, is always 0. So the phosphorus does oxidize and it becomes +5 in this case. So that is true. And the molecular phosphorus oxidation number at first is 0. And so it is true that it does oxidize itself. Nitrogen reduces itself, so it gains electrons. So we go from +5 to -5. The correct answer is C. So as I told you, only one of these two could be correct. And nitrogen does lose electrons. Oxidizing agent, don't be confused. It would mean that it is reduced. Sorry, it would mean that it gains, but it loses. So pay attention to the difference between oxidizing agent and reducing agent, and something that is oxidized and reduced. Which of these categories are not spatial isomers? Enantiomers, radioisomers, and rotamers. Okay, the answers for this is D, 1 and 3. Do keep in mind all the kind of isomers that exist. Here we have a little scheme. We have a constitutional structural, which means that the formula is the same, but the position of an element changes. Then we have the spatial isomers, which are so-called stereoisomers more commonly, in which you have the enantiomers and the rotamers. Remember, the rotamers are the ones in which you have two parts that are connected, which can slide one over the other. So in some cases, the two parts can be, one part can cover completely the other. And that's the rotamer. That's the characteristic, at least. So the correct answer is B. Yeah, sorry, I did the opposite. Which are the spatial isomers? Sorry. The one that is not a spatial isomer is 2, because again, it's as a constitutional isomer, a structural isomer. Sorry again. So the correct answer is B. Which sample of gas contains the fewest molecules? So they give us the UMA for each element that is contained in these compounds. So what we do for each one of them is calculate how many moles. We don't need to specifically calculate the number of particles, because they all have in common the number, the Avogadro number, this constant. Therefore, just by calculating the moles, you will be fine, because the one with the least amount of moles, of course, will be the one with the least amount of molecules. So to calculate that, we do the mass divided by the mass, which we would calculate on our own, and divide it by the and divide it by the by the numbers that were given to us. By that we calculate the moles, and from that we get to know that the correct answer is D, because it's the one with the least moles. Which of the elements listed as the following electron configuration? Okay, we have 2 isotopes and 3 elements. This is, okay, first of all, you need to remember that in order to figure out which element it is, you need to find out the number of electrons, which you do by putting all of these numbers together. So 2 plus 2 plus 6 plus 1, so 11. So we have 11 electrons. Okay, so usually sodium will be the correct answer. The problem is that this is an isotope, and they tell us that it's -1, which means that it has 12 electrons. And therefore, it's not the correct answer. Then all the other one, you kind of have to remember how many electrons they have. Again, when it comes to these more important elements, try to remember as many information as possible. Potassium has 19 electrons, manganese 25, and chlorine has 17. So the correct answer is neon, which is an isotope which would have 11 electrons, which would have, again, 10 electrons, but since they tell us that it's -1, it means that it has 11, like they want in this configuration. And so this is the correct answer, C. Suppose to have a bottle of concentrated acetic acid, 6 moles. How much acetic acid do you have to use in order to obtain 200 milliliters of a 3.5 mole solution of acetic acid? Okay, so in this case, always remember that it's not a proportion. You can do it's not a proportion. You have to remember that the number of moles is equal to. Sorry, before I said that capital M is always molarity. Sorry, that was my mistake. So we know that the number of moles is always equal to the molarity multiplied for the volume. So in these two cases, we have the same number of moles, which means that we can compare M per V1 and M per V2. So the two situations that the solution is in. So now that we have this, we need to calculate the volume 1. And by doing this, by substituting all the molarity and volume required, we find that it is 120 milliliters. So the correct answer is A. Okay. Consider the reaction which is given. Which of the following statement is or are correct? Okay, so in this case, like before, it is correctly balanced. You need to check that out by simply checking how many, if all the numbers correspond. And we see that chlorine oxidizes itself, becomes +5, but also reduces itself and becomes -1. And this is what is called a disproportionation, which means that an element both gets oxidized and reduced, which means that option 1 and 3 are correct in the sense that chlorine's oxidation number is +5 in sodium chlorate, and the reaction is a disproportionation. Sorry. Okay. Number 51. Which of the following pairs of molecules represent functional isomers? Okay, so functional isomers will be something that has the same brute formula, which means the same, in this case, the same amount of carbons and hydrogen. You have to remember how to build these all these elements. They are all quite basic, and how many carbons and especially hydrogen they have, because in all of these we essentially have 5 carbons. What changes is the hydrogen. And I think that the two that can confuse you the most is A and E. The correct answer is A, cyclopentane and 2-pentane, because they both have 5CHC. It is not cyclopentene, because cyclopentene has 2 more hydrogens because it has a double bond, so it is H7, so it's not the correct answer. Okay. Number 52. Dicloxacillin is a penicillin antibiotic used to treat bacterial infections by inhibiting the action of the transpeptidase enzyme belonging to the class of the PBP proteins, penicillin binding proteins. Which of the following option represents some of the chemical functions present in the molecule? Okay, in this case, you can essentially skip the first part, because what they're asking us is what you see in this molecule, which is the one that they're talking about, which of these elements we can find. And in this case, that's why I'm telling you that it's very important to remember the basic element of organic chemistry. And the only one that you might not have known is lactam, but all the other were correct. You have an amide, a sulfide bond, a carboxylic acid here, and this lactam, which is essentially a cyclic amide, where the last carbon atom of the carbon-carbon bond chain is bonded to the nitrogen of the amide. So it's essentially something cyclic that is connected to the nitrogen of the amide. I can assure you that you usually don't find it often in tests, but the point here is to be able to find everything else, as you can see in the correct answer, which is the amide, lactam, sulfide, and carboxylic acid. And this kind of question is very common in IMAT, where you see a scheme or a molecule, and they ask you to do something on that. Okay, there's some questions, great. So if you need anything, we're here. And now I'll pass to maths and physics. Thanks for listening.
Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me. Okay, I'm now gonna correct the last segment of the test, which, as you know, is maths and physics. So here we go. Okay. Of course, if you have questions, be sure to leave them in the chat, and I will answer them later. So let's start with the first question, which was number 53. The fraction t to the, I can't say, t to the fifth, yeah, minus t to the third over 2 times t to the second. Well, I'm not going to read it out loud. I mean, you can see it, so it's kind of pointless for me to read it. Is equal to, and you had like all the different options. This is an exercise on polynomial decomposition. This is the list of all the notable products that you should remember. And some of them are more obvious, like the first one. Some of them are like, maybe you didn't remember, but are still important, like the seventh. In this case, you had to use this notable product in order to solve the problem. In particular, you can start from the numerator, and you can collect t to the second. In this way, you will be left with t to the third minus 1, which, of course, can then be decomposed thanks to the notable product that we've seen before, number 7, the difference between 2 cubes. And it will be equal to the difference between the cube roots of these two numbers, so t and 1, and then the square of the first number, the square of the second number, and the product between the two numbers. So this is the decomposition of the polynomial. Whereas as for the denominator, you could collect t minus 1, and this would leave you with 2 times t to the second minus 3 times t to the second. And so you will be left with minus t to the second times t minus 1. And then you could simplify the equation just by eliminating t to the second here and t minus 1. And so the correct answer was minus t to the second minus t minus 1, which was answer B. So that was the correct answer. This was, in my opinion, a pretty easy one. Okay, so the next question is a geometry question. In the triangle ABC, the side AB, the length of the side AB is equal to 6 times the square root of 3 centimeters. The length of AC is equal to 12 centimeters, whereas the length of BC is equal to 6 centimeters. And it was required to find the measure of the angle B. Now, in this case, you could solve this problem in 2 different ways. This first one is easier. It's a bit of a shortcut. It's like a smarter way to get to the solution, but it will not work in all the cases. But you could note that the 3 lengths of the sides were satisfying Pythagoras' theorem, basically, which, as you know, is this one. So in this case, the square of 12 centimeters is equal to the sum of the squares of 6 centimeters and 6 times the square root of 3, because of course 108 plus 36 is equals to 144. So of course the angle B had to be 90 degrees. But in case you didn't notice this, you could also use another rule, which is a basic rule of trigonometry, which is the law of cosines. It is also called the Carnot theorem, and it is used because it relates the lengths of the sides of a triangle to the cosine of one of its angles. So in this case, because you were given the length of all the 3 different sides, you could use the theorem to calculate the cosine, in this case of the angle gamma, but applied to the triangle in the problem, it was the angle B. So the cosine of B, as you can see, could be calculated by taking the length of the bigger side of the triangle minus the square of the other 2 over minus 2AB, which is the product between 2 other sides of the triangle. So in this case, applying to the triangle in the problem, you had 12 to the second minus 6 to the second minus 6 to the second times 3, and this was equal to 0. So the cosine of B was 0, and you know that if an angle has a cosine of 0, it can either be 90 degrees or 270 degrees. But of course, because it is a triangle, the inner angle of a triangle cannot be higher than 180 degrees. So the only eligible option was 90 degrees. So again, this was another way to solve the problem, maybe a bit harder, but it will work in any case. The correct answer, anyhow, was D, 90 degrees. Moving on with question number 55, another geometry one. From a point Q, the length of the tangent to a circle is 24 centimeters. And the distance of Q from the center is 25 centimeters. The radius of the circle is. Now, of course, as in every geometry problem, it is very useful to make a drawing of what's been described in the text. So in this case, this is the circle, the center is O, the external point is Q, and the point of contact is P. Now, you know that PQ is 24 centimeters, whereas OQ is 25 centimeters. And you also know, because of basic laws of geometry, that the radius of the circle that touches the point of contact with the tangent is perpendicular to the tangent itself, which means that the angle OPQ is a right angle, measures 90 degrees. Hence, the triangle is a right triangle. And we can use Pythagoras to calculate the length of OP, which is the radius of the circle. And the correct answer was 7 centimeters, just applying Pythagoras again. And so the correct answer was A, 7 centimeters. Okay, since there are no questions, I will move on to question number 56, the last question of maths, which is actually, again, a geometry question. So in this simulation, you had a lot of geometry to make. Given a triangle inscribed in a circumference of radius R, and given that the triangle lays on the circumference's diameter and that one of its sides that reaches the circumference border measures R. What's the ratio between the circumference and the triangle's area? and you had all the different options. This sounded hard, but honestly, it wasn't that hard. Of course, it is very useful to make a drawing, as in this case. The drawing down here is actually not completely related to the problem because, okay, so this is the triangle. One of its sides is the diameter of a circle, but there's like the side isn't equal to the radius. So this is a difference with the text. However, the image of the actual problem will be pretty similar to this one. So, you know, of course, that an angle that has its vertex on the circumference and that insists on the diameter of the circumference itself is equal to 90 degrees. This is a basic law of geometry, and you should remember that. So we know that the angle here, ACB, is necessarily 90 degrees. So this is a right triangle. We also know that AB equals 2 times the radius, of course, and CB equals the radius, not in this specific drawing, but it will be equal to R. And so we can calculate the length of AC just by using Pythagoras theorem again. And then, so this is the length of the other side of the triangle using Pythagoras. It was the square root of 3 times R, of course. And then you could use it to calculate the area, of course, because the 2 sides of the right triangle are perpendicular. So one is taken as the base, one is taken as the height, and then you divide it by 2, and you have the area, which is a square root of 3 times R to the second over 2. Whereas the circle area, as you know, of a circle is pi times R squared. And so the ratio between the two, you could eliminate R, and you were left with 2 times pi over the square root of 3. And so this was the solution to the problem. The correct answer was D. And so that was the last question of maths. We're now moving on to physics, which in my opinion was a whole lot harder than the maths part. Starting with question number 57. A coil of length 10 centimeters and radius 1 centimeter is placed in the middle of a closed conductive path of resistance 100 ohms. A current of 10 times T amperes flows inside the coil where T represents time. What is the current flowing through the conductive path if the coil has 100 turns and its axis is perpendicular to the plane of the path? This is the dielectric constant, which was necessary to solve the problem, and we were giving it to you so that you don't have to remember it. These were all the different options. Now let's get to the solution. So this is a very difficult question, in my opinion. So it was important to understand what was going on. So I made a little drawing here. I hope it helps you understand what's happening. This is the side of the problem from above, basically. So you're seeing what's happening from above. And this circle here is the coil. The coil should have 100 turns. I only drew 4, of course, but you have to imagine that it has 100 turns. And it's basically just a cable that is making all these turns around itself. And there's a current that's flowing through this coil. And the current is changing over time because the current, as we see, is 10 times T. Then we have the closed conductive path on the outside, which is this rectangle. Actually, we weren't provided with the shape of the closed conductive path, nor with its size, but that is like not necessary. It's not relevant to the solution of the problem. So I drew a rectangle, but it could really be any kind of shape. What matters is that the axis of the coil, which is perpendicular to the coil itself, basically, was perpendicular to the closed conductive path. This means that the coil and the closed conductive path are parallel, and it's important. Now, because of the laws of electromagnetism, when a current is flowing through a coil, it will create a magnetic field in the middle of the coil itself, like right here. You have to imagine that the magnetic field has a direction that is perpendicular to the screen itself. So it's like in this direction. I know I look dumb, but like this is the direction of the magnetic field. And there's a formula to calculate the magnetic field, which is this one. Here it is. So this is the constant that you have to use. N is the number of turns, and I is the current, whereas L is the total length of the coil. And yeah, so you could calculate the magnetic field, and then you also have to calculate the flux of the magnetic field. What is the flux? It's a physical quantity that is just given by the magnetic field times the surface where it is applied. In this case, it was the area of the smaller circle, which is a circle of radius 1 centimeters. So you could calculate the area. And why on earth, you might be wondering, we must calculate the flux? Because we have to use the flux to calculate the EMF. Now, the EMF is the electromotive force, the inductive electromotive force, which is just the difference in potential that is created on the outer closed conductive path, on this one, because of the changing of the magnetic field on the coil. This is another basic law of electromagnetism, and it is called Faraday-Neumann's law. It's one of Maxwell's equations. And we know that in order to calculate the EMF, you have to make the derivative of the flux over time. We can calculate the flux because we know the magnetic field and the surface. So we then have to derive this, and it's a very easy derivative. You just have to eliminate the time here. So you will be left with a constant. So there's not, it's not depending on time anymore, it's a constant. And as you can see, this is the surface, the area of the circle, and this is the magnetic field, and then T goes away. Then this is just the first Ohm's law, which you're probably more familiar with. It just states that the current is equal to the difference in potential, in this case, the EMF, over the resistance, which you were provided with. It was 100 ohmegas. So in order to calculate the current that was inducted on the closed conductive path, you had to divide the EMF by the resistance, and substituting everything in the equation. This is the constant, this is the number of turns, this is the initial current, it's 10. It was 10 times T, but then T went away. This is the surface, whereas this is the total length of the coil. It was 10 centimeters, so 0.1 meters, times 100 ohmegas, and the solution was this one. So the correct answer was D. To be honest, I would have skipped this one if it was at the test, because it's very long, it is complicated, it's very easy to make a mistake. So unless you're like really strong on electromagnetism, I would probably advise you to skip this one, but still it can give you more points. So if you feel like you can do it, do it. So correct answer was D. Then question number 58. Okay, so this question contained a mistake. So don't worry if you couldn't find the right solution, because there was the information was wrong here. So in the text that you found, the layer of ice was 5 meters thick, whereas it was actually 1 meter thick. And so of course, with 5 meters, the result was not correct. So we have eliminated this question from the count of your final score in the test. So you will be you won't be subtracted points, nor will you be given points. So hopefully this makes it more even. I apologize for this problem. However, let's now correct the problem altogether. A 1 meter thick layer of ice forms on the top of the surface of a cylindrical water container of radius 10 meters. The temperature of the air outside is minus 10 Celsius degrees. We would like it to be this cold these days. That of the water below the ice is 0 degrees. The latent heat of fusion of ice is 330 joules over grams, and its density is 1 gram over centimeters cubed. If the layer of ice has a thermal conductivity of 2 watts over meters times kelvins, how much does it thicken in 1 hour? Now, in order to solve this problem, you had to remember a couple equations, like this was a problem on thermal conductivity, so on conduction of heat, which is, as you know, one of the ways by which you can heat can be transferred from one body to another. And this is the equation of the conduction, which is also called Fourier's law. Basically, okay, you can imagine everything as a cylinder. So there's the water that is 0 degrees Celsius, the ice, and then the air over the ice. So the temperature gradient between the two ends of the cylinder, which is the ice, supports a heat flux from the water through the ice and to the air. This is obvious because the water is warmer than the air outside, so the heat will go from the water to the air, and it will go through the ice. Since the water below the ice has a temperature of 0 degrees Celsius, it starts turning into ice as soon as it starts yielding heat. Of course, we know that 0 degrees Celsius is the temperature at which the water turns into ice, so it doesn't have to further decrease its temperature. The water is already at 0 degrees, but you will also know that in order to be turned into ice, water requires yielding some more heat, which is called the latent heat the latent heat of fusion, which can be calculated using this formula. You were given 330 joules over grams, so it was pretty obvious that you had to multiply the latent heat of fusion by the mass in order to find the heat. Okay, use the units of measures to help you understand how the formulas can be used. In this case, because the latent heat of fusion was joules over grams, it was obvious that you had to multiply by the mass. So in this case, this is the formula of the latent heat of fusion, which is the only heat, as we said, that needs to be yielded. And then this is another formula which basically states that the volume is equal to the mass over density, which you should know. You were given the density and everything. So by unifying these three formulas, you could get to the solution, because you could calculate the heat using this formula just by taking the time to the other side, and you could calculate the heat. Then you knew that the heat was related to the mass thanks to this equation, and you knew that the mass was related to the volume thanks to this other equation. And then you know that the volume is, of course, related to the height thanks to this other equation. It's just the formula of the volume of a cylinder. The height is equal to the volume over the surface, which you were given. And so you could unite everything, and this was the final formula. Alpha is the thermal conductivity, which was 2. The surface was 10. The surface was simplified because it is both in the numerator and denominator, so you could eliminate it. And so 10 is the difference in temperature. Please note that theoretically we should have converted the temperature in kelvins, but in this case, because it is a difference in temperature, it doesn't matter whether it's kelvins or Celsius. What matters is that both the temperatures have the same unit of measure. So it was 10. And then time is 3,600 seconds, because it's 1 hour. You have, though, to convert it into seconds. And then D, this was the information that was not correct. It was 1, it wasn't 5. So then you had lambda, which was the latent heat of fusion, 330. Then the density, which you had to convert, because the density was given in grams over centimeters, but the final length that we want to have is in meters. So we converted the density in meters cubed. So this was the final solution, 0.022 centimeters. Again, this was a very hard question, so correct answer was A. But the correct answer with the given text would be 0.0044 centimeters. So in that case, if you found this to be the solution, you would be correct. So yeah, bravo. Now let's move on to question number 59, a dynamics question. A 1 kilogram ball is tied to a spring on the top of a slope with a height of 3 meters. The spring is stretched 100 millimeters from its resting length and has a constant of 30 newtons over meters. The system is in equilibrium and no friction force is involved. Which of the following are correct? 1, the total potential energy of the ball is 30.50 joules. The sign of alpha is 0.6. Theoretically, in the question, you did find the drawing that is not here, but it was in the question, so it should have been clear what alpha was. And then number 3, the spring pulls the ball with a force of 3 newtons and all the different options. So let's start with the first option, which is the total potential energy. Now we know that potential energy there are different forms of potential energy: gravitational, elastic, and electric. In this case, there was no charge involved, so there was no electric potential energy, but there was gravitational potential energy on the ball, and also elastic potential energy, because the gravitational potential energy can be calculated through this formula, m times g times h, where g is the gravitational constant, the mass is 1 kilograms, and the height is 3 meters, so it was 30 joules. And then the elastic potential energy was 15, can be calculated with this formula. So the constant times the elongation of the spring squared over 2, just the half of it. So substituting, we found 0.15 joules of elastic potential energy. So in total, it was 30.15 joules. And so the first option was correct. Then let's go to the third, which also was pretty easy. The spring pulls the ball with a force of 3 newtons. There's a very simple formula that you can use to calculate the force of a spring, as you know, which is this one. The force is given by the constant times the elongation. So 30 newtons over meters times 0.1 meters equals 3 newtons. So the force was 3 newtons. And then the second option, which was the toughest one, in my opinion, this is the angle alpha. Here it is. So the sign of alpha is 0.6. In order to tell whether this option is correct or not, it is useful to understand which forces are implied in the problem. So we have 3 forces. The blue force is the elastic force, which is given by the spring. Then we have the gravitational force. Here it is in red. And then this is just a decomposition of the gravitational force. And then the normal reaction, which is another force, and it's green here. So these are the 3 forces. Because the ball is in equilibrium, the forces must even each other out. So in this case, we can divide the forces in 2 directions, the parallel direction and the perpendicular direction. And we know that Fn is perpendicular and must be equal to the perpendicular component of the weight force, whereas the elastic force is parallel and must be equal to the parallel component of the gravitational force. Now, we can calculate Fg perpendicular and Fg parallel by using the sines and cosines of this alpha angle, because please note that Fg and Fg perpendicular are both perpendicular to the lines that created the alpha angle. And so this pink angle here is equal to alpha. So this pink angle is equal to alpha. And so FG times the cosine of alpha gives FG perpendicular, and FG times the sine of alpha gives FG parallel. But we also know the gravitational force, which is 10 newtons. And so we can, yeah, for the first law of dynamics, as we said, the total force is 0. So FG parallel equals FE. And this means that because FG parallel is equal to FG times the sine of A, we can find the sine of A being 0.3 and not 0.6. So the second option was not correct. And the correct answer was C, only 1 and 3. So this was the correct answer of this question. And let's move to the final question of the test, which is question number 60. A helicopter is flying at 20 meters per second speed and weighs 12,000 kilograms. The helicopter is carrying a stock of avocados that by itself has a weight of 2,000 kilograms. Due to the load not being properly fixed to the vehicle, it suddenly falls altogether with a speed of 10 meters per second that is parallel to the speed of the helicopter and has its same direction. What is the speed of the helicopter after the load has departed from it? Now, this was a pretty medium difficult problem in my opinion, and it required understanding the principle of conservation of momentum. So you have this helicopter, okay, and then the avocados just part in the same direction as the helicopter. So this is basically the image of the problem that you have to keep in mind. Whereas the equation that you needed to use was this one, which simply states that the initial momentum is equal to the final momentum, because the momentum is conserved, because there's no force acting here, so the momentum is conserved. And the initial momentum is simply given by the total mass of the helicopter plus the avocados for the times the initial speed, which is VI, and which was equal to 240,000 kilograms times meters per second, whereas the final momentum was given by the momentum of the avocados and the momentum of the helicopter by itself. Now we know the momentum of the avocados because we're given its speed and its mass. We know the mass of the helicopter by itself. We know that QF is equal to QI, so we can calculate VH, which is the speed of the helicopter. And the answer was 22 meters per second. So the correct answer was B. And that will be it for today. If there are no questions, I am going to wish you a wonderful Saturday. And we will see you at the following simulations and at the courses. Thanks for tuning in and for sticking around up to the end of the correction. And have a wonderful weekend. Bye. How do I stop this?